We're at 716 Prince Street, and this lot, like most of the lots in town, were divided at that time 100 feet wide and 220 feet deep, half a block deep. Apparently the lots were 440 by 440. And this lot came halfway through. So he had plenty of room. He had a little stable in place over here. He kept a cow right downtown here. And then a chicken yard, okay? And one thing about that chicken yard, and along there was some other garage building. I remember them well because we'd climb on top of them to eat figs. There was a huge fig tree there. And we could eat on the bottom, then climb on top of the garage and eat off the top of the tree. But anyway, this lot, let's see, the cow was there. Then the back of it was a garden. Chicken yard over here, and I guess I can tell this, there was a little outhouse right up here. Okay? Then there was, just about here, was an outdoor pump, okay, artesian pump. We call it a number 2 pitcher pump. And people came from around to get it to make their hominy grits, okay, because it made clean, clear grits. Otherwise, you'd have to get water that came into town from the Black River, and the water was dark. The water we got in Georgetown at that time was about the color of tea.
Right.
Okay. So that pretty much covers the backyard here. Oh, next door over here, the house where Jeep Ford now lives. Jeep, his nickname, Francis B. Ford. He was named for Francis B. for Dr. Bell. That was Dr. Bell, so he was the doctor. I think we had 3 doctors in Georgetown. Dr. Bell and Dr. Assey and Dr. Brightman. Those were the 3 doctors. But and the thing that's really missing back here is Miss Bell's pecan tree and 2 pecan trees in this backyard. At that time, huge trees, you know. My family lived right 2 blocks from here.
Right.
Okay. So that's the reason I say when we'd come from school, I'd never make it all the way home because this was 2 blocks, and I walked from school with my cousin, my first cousin, who I had no brothers, and he and I were very much like brothers. And I'd just pick up the phone and say, "I'm down here," to let them know, okay, that was all I needed to say. And I had to remember those phone numbers. That was 263, this was 203. My father's telephone number at the Comiskey Grocery Company was 113. Well, they had a 113 in the front and 113J in the back. Well, come on. Fried chicken and her biscuits and, you know, rice and gravy and just a wonderful, wonderful cook. Liza cooked for him. She was Liza Grant. We had Liza Ward. Liza Ward was our cook. And Liza Grant would go to the beach in the summertime, she and her son, who we called Junior, and he would go, and he was one of the Factum Sanctorum up over there. There was he and his mother, and then we had what they call a creek boy, Ernest Grice. Every day.
Every day.
Other than Sunday. Papa had a garden back over there too. There was an old fella, Joe Gorse, who lived down the way, lived on that place. Some of the homes over there now, you wouldn't believe where he had. And he had a cow over there that we would get the milk and hogs. What we'd do every day, if you'll excuse the expression, after the meals, we'd go down and slop the hogs. Don't you know? You know about slopping the hogs?
You'd feed them
Well,
what was left over.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And it finally got the best of my grandfather.
At,
97. Yes. Finished him off.
and he drank milk from that cow
Oh,
that
my
was
God,
right
listen
here.
to me. I remember in his last days, you know, when he could hardly eat. And he was up 94 or 5 at that time. He'd go to the table, and he had that glass of milk, and he'd take those biscuits that Liza could make, and crumble them up in that milk, and spoon those biscuits in milk. That was some of the last food that he could eat by himself. You'd go 2 blocks, it would be white, and then another block would be black population. See, a lot of this property now, just like the Kaminsky house right down here, huge house. It was where those Charleston houses are on this corner down, was the big Kaminsky house. And behind it, and there's property right over here, it was the same. They brought people in from the plantation and gave them a house, a place to live. And finally, that became, I forget now the term for it, but after they'd had it for 6 years or so, you know, that was domicile. So,
So they then
so a
owned
lot
it.
of that property stayed with them in later years. The end of Front Street down at, well, excuse me, down on the bay down here, where you have monstrous homes now, that was, we called it Slab Town. Okay, because the houses down there were built with slabs from the mill. And I remember probably one of my first trips down to where Liza lived down there. She raised a wonderful family. I mean, an outstanding family. The inside of her house was, like I say, the smooth side of the slab, right? And the walls were done with flour paste and newspapers. That's the way the walls were on the inside. The Esdorn, there's an unusual name, but E-S, capital D-O-R. They lived in that big house around on the corner here that I showed you right across from the church. They lived there. Oh, family, Witte, W-I-T-T-E, German, Franz, and his name was Franz. I hope he's still in Charleston. I used to play poker with him when he had macular degeneration, and about like Charlotte Pace, beat me every time. Charlotte Pace plays bridge with us. She's 92 years old, macular degeneration. She had a hard time keeping the spades and the clubs and the hearts and the diamonds, and you have to have. And I usually call it out when we're playing. She is one of the best bridge players. We'll have 20 bridge players there. She's going to be in the top 3 or 4. Isn't that remarkable? We
What
played,
did you play?
Of course, hopscotch.
Right, okay.
We played a game called shinny, that you'd like that game.
Was that shinnying up the tree, or was that what, how did you shinny?
We'd make like hockey sticks. You'd take a piece of branch that had a curve on the bottom of it and make the hockey stick. And then you take a ball or a tin can, a lot of times a tin can, and hit it with that thing. And if somebody was getting the best of you, you'd hit him on the shin with a hockey stick. We always call it, and you would do it, say, shinny. So we played, like I said, hopscotch and shinny, and of course you outgrew hopscotch after so long. And the can, which was, you'd have a circle, and you take it and throw it, and when you threw it, you were it, and everybody ran and hid, and then you'd have to find, when you caught somebody, they'd have to come back, and that was another game that I remember playing. Of course, the girls would make little like trolley cars out of shoe boxes, cut windows in them and put paper on them, and you'd have a hole in the top of it where you could put a candle down in it and drag them down the street. Huh? And the other thing we like to do was catch June bugs, okay, and tie a string, tie a piece of thread to them and make those June bugs fly around. And plenty to do.
Keep them in close.
Plenty to do. You never went inside. Oh,
With lots of trees down here?
Well, I'll tell you our favorite place for any games like that, right over on that corner at the courthouse. The courthouse and all around it. Oh man, that was a place. Yeah.
Lots of little nooks and crannies you could get into.
And that's also where we used to skate, because there's a slight decline from Prince Street down to the town clock. Okay, and you could get on that and make your rings. You're holding on in front and do the wheel, and that's where we played now. Outside. The waterfront down there was active. There was a big cotton warehouse right next door to it. When I was real young, there was a cotton warehouse down there, and they used to carry cotton by the boat, bringing it in from up the country and then loading it off to go to other places. This, of course, was the living room.
Living room.
All right.
Okay.
With the bookcases still there. That's the original. That going into the dining room.
Okay.
The piano was right here. Oh. There was a cellar, the heating plant was down there. And they asked me one time after the whole family passed away, I think I was executive of every one of that five. When they all passed away, "Oh, Billy, why didn't you buy the place?" I said, "Listen, I was in the oil business and I was delivering oil to that house, and I knew how much it took to heat it." and I had heard, in fact, Papa Beatty, when he sold the house at Merle's Emmett, this is the story that I heard later on, and he cleaned up on that. He sold that house for $3,800. But the reason was he borrowed some money to paint this place. And that was when we all started taking off hitchhiking to Paula's, hitchhiking, not in the creek where we were supposed to be, bringing in food. And he said, before I borrow some more money to pay off that loan or renegotiate that loan, I'm just going to sell this house and use that money. So I painted this house. That's why I lost the house at Merle's.
Okay.
I guess coming here on Christmas is one thing I remember. This was always part of the Christmas day, was to come down here. We had 3 rounds. Then my my uncle's house, which was right around the corner on High Market Street. It was we were in the 700 block, it was the 600 block, and we were in the 500 block. So we'd come here for Christmas and then go to Uncle Marvin's house. I think that's the first thing I probably remember as a child, coming here for Christmas. Uncle Norton always got a handkerchief.
Okay.
Aunt Louise always got some Evening in Paris perfume. What can you do with $1 for 10 people?
Right, right.
That was...
And what for the little children? Did you have stockings?
We call them Jack Stones and things like that. Yeah. And that's one of my worst memories, is Jack Stone. You step on a Jack Stone in the middle of the night, you remember that?
Yes.
You remember that for life. This was his den. Fireplace here, a couch over here, and Papa's chair right here. And I don't care if this house was 85 degrees inside, Papa was cold unless he could sit there and see a fire in that grate. Now, if he could see a fire in there, he was warm. But otherwise...
He was cold.
I remember that particular. I'd be in here roasting. This is the dining room. I think this is the office now.
Yeah, that's Mr. Kimberly's office.
And you notice the fire grates in each room. It was not unusual for there to be 8 or more, you know, at the table there. Particularly when I came over.
Right.
But Papa and his sister Aunt Eunice, and Min and Weed and Ned and Junior and me, and then 3 cousins whose mother got a divorce and they came. So that's 10 right there, which is, and Eliza cooking for us back there. No, but I can remember killing.
Okay.
2 at a time, like that. Huh? Did you ever do that?
And,
Huh?
no.
You catch 2 of them by the neck, but before we killed them, we always hypnotized them.
And did you pick the feathers off the
Oh yeah, I've
chickens?
done that.
You did
Yeah,
that too,
yeah.
and cleaned
The
it?
other way was, and I can see my daddy doing it now. We had that block out in the backyard. You take that chicken head, he had a way of stretching that neck and putting it on there. That was the painless way to do it. Yeah.
Mighty good when they were fried though, weren't they?
But we usually had dogs around, but all the and whatnot. One thing we do now is those go into a crab trap, you know.
Right.
That goes in crab. But in those days, when we fished off the dock at Marizona, what we wanted was flounder heads. Because a flounder head, a big flounder head is the best thing in the world. You take that sink and run right through its mouth and tie a knot. That was the way to fish with a flounder head. And this was Butler's Pantry.
This was Butler.
At that time, they called it Butler's Pantry.
Right. And it held all the dishes and things.
And the refrigerator. Now back in here was a big stove over here. Okay, big wood
Wooden
stove.
stove.
Wood stove,
Yeah.
yeah. And,
With a cistern on the side
oh yeah.
that had
Yes,
the water
indeed.
that stayed warm.
And boy, at Merrill's Inlet, that's what we had. And I can remember getting a bucket. If you could had some in it, you could throw 1 bucket of it, not bucket, but a big pot full in the tub. You felt like you were somebody in there. And Papa would get out in that, we had a outside shower. I wouldn't even stick my toe in it. My grandfather, up in his 80s, and right in that cold shower in the evening, he had to have that cold shower bath before he went to bed.
Did you ever take the lid off of the stove and toast
yeah.
your bread over that?
Yeah. And
Had
one of
a lifter, a lid lifter?
talking about that, I always said I had 3 mothers. My mother, my Aunt Mildred, who lived here, we called her Min, and our Liza, who was with me, and talking about taking that lid. For some reason, I went in the kitchen one time, and I took that lid off, and I took a piece of bread, and I put in there, and what Liza did to me and told me, I'll never forget that. That's one of the first lessons I ever learned. You don't waste food. She said, you don't throw your something away. Something to eat. She said, you don't throw your something to eat away. And boy, I mean, it stayed with me. But at Christmas time, boy, I mean, you had to buy the biggest, the loudest thing you could get. And they had those, I think they call them the M10 now, the round bombs thing. And we could get in between that office building and the town clock okay? And see who could ring the bell up there. We'd light that thing and throw it up in the air, and if it went off up there, it would reverberate that thing up there and make that bell ring.
Right.
That was one of the
Joy.
tricks at Christmas time. But firecrackers down there. Well, one reason we'd walk down Front Street was to see if you saw a stranger. If you saw somebody that you didn't know, boy, you went home and said, look, I saw somebody on Front Street that
I never saw before.
absolutely, wonder who it is, somebody new in town. Huh?
Did
That's
you
a
ever go
fact.
down and just watch the boats?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Another mistake I made there, I used to go down to Cthulhu Fish House, okay? And the old ladies used to come down there and fish. They'd sit along that thing and they could fish, and also crab down there. And they'd fish. And I went down there one time when I was a kid, and they were fishing, and I stepped across this fishing pole. That was another end of the world, just like Lila putting that food in that stove. I got a lesson. Hey, you don't step across a fishing pole. No, sir. That to put a hex on that right there.
Oh,
Yeah.
dear.
But Cthulhu Fish House was a great place. Next to Cthulhu Fish House down there was the old S.O. Marine dock. And my cousin was the dock master in there. And he had a fellow, Charlie Wright, that used to work for him down there. And I was down there with Charlie one day. And next door off the Cthulhu Fish dock, these little boys used to come down and swim in that water down there. And just across, before they cut that canal across for the ships, you know, that used to be an island that came all the way around. There was just a little passage in between there, a little gap that really made that end of it, which used to be a lumber mill, made it an island. A big gator, used to be some gators in there. A big gator came out of that thing and was swimming down that river, and those boys were swimming there. I said, Charlie, look at those boys over there swimming and that gator coming down there. He said, Mr. Billy, they can't dead.
They can't dead.
They can't dead.
Now that was all before the paper mill and the steel mill came.
Well, the paper mill came in, it said 37. All this happened one time. They finished the bridge. The first bridge across there was in 37, 36, 37. And the paper mill was coming in at that time. So that was a big, thing in Georgetown.
You remember the excitement
Oh,
about it?
golly, yeah. Yeah, big celebration for the opening of the bridge. In fact, I remember quite well because my cousin Ned was a little bit on the portly side, and we were down there hot. Oh, it was hot. And Ned passed out. I remember hit the deck down there. We went into those little Whistling Pigs before they moved over to the building over across the street where they were for years. They had a little shack over on that side. And I went in and got some water. Somebody did. I don't see how I did. Somebody got some water, brought it in for Ned to bring him around. Yeah, it wasn't at that location. It was on a road that goes up towards Andrews, right down in the 5 Point down there. I'm trying to think what's there. Okay, that building at one time was an automobile agency down there. It was down just about there. Trying to think the name of the people that had it. Morris, yeah. Morris Ice House, yeah. One of the Morrises was a little bit bad on the and at one time,
Tipping.
maybe we can't put this on either, but at one time, that Confederate monument that you see, used to sit in the middle of High Market Street, right at High Market and Broad. There was a big circle at High Market and Broad, and that statue sat up there. Well, after Kiwi knocked it down for the second time, they decided to move it. His name was Caleb, C-A-L-E-B, Caleb Morris. He would take the shortcut through the middle of that circle and down would come the poor old Confederate soldier. Well, she brings up another thing talking about Georgetown. Back in those days, like I said, my father worked for Comiskey. Comiskey was the name in Georgetown. But not only the Comiskey, we had Mayor and one of my very closest friends, his brother, was Rosen. Sylvan Rosen was mayor for years. And the Jewish population of Georgetown was the backbone of this town.
Mm-hmm.
When Rita died, I think just before that, my very close friend, Maya Rosen, who was down in a nursing home in Charleston, Maya had told me, he said, Billy, you know, there are only about 5 of us left in Georgetown now, and Rita was one of them. So I think there may be 4 Jewish people in Georgetown. Some of them are Nat Kaminsky, who you've heard, probably heard his name, Nathan Kaminsky. His son is Kim Kaminsky. Kim's real active. In fact, he's been on the Historical Society board. For Kim, he's not a practicing Jew. I think he's probably Episcopalian. A lot of them must have been. But they're gone, all the Jewish population. Yeah, I remember Rita, and Rita taught piano and had a nice voice. Oh Lord. Everybody knows Virginia.
Everybody knows Virginia.
Everybody knows
Okay.
Virginia.
Okay.
Bless her heart. She's another active one. Yes,
Okay.
very much for the Baptist Church too. She's done a lot. That cemetery when you come into Georgetown on Church Street on the right hand side, well, where the Confederate soldiers is
Right,
now.
right.
Okay. That was the old Baptist, original
Cemetery.
Baptist cemetery.
Okay.
And she's very active on, and anything else that you call on her for.
She'll
I
do
say
it.
that for, you know.
I just heard about her last night.
Her
Yeah.
father was one of the most well-known people, y'all. Bright Pruitt, Sheriff of Georgetown County. Yes, sir. And he was for years and years and years. If we hadn't had a Brewerton or a Carter or a Cribb for a sheriff in Georgetown, we hadn't had a sheriff. You just notice that's a period we hadn't had a sheriff. Bernard Baruch, yeah, and Mr. Eddie Kaminsky were related. Some sisters are related. And also one of my aunts by marriage, she was an Eric, and that was another one of the first families of Georgia, E-H-R-I-C-H. She was an Eric. Mr. Baruch didn't have a phone over on Hobco at the time, and he'd come in to use Mr. Eddie's phone. And like I said, there weren't too many phones, 113. He was using 113J in the back. And he'd come in and prop his feet up on Mr. Eddie's desk and talk to Wall Street. And of course, when I'd come home from school a lot of times, I'd cut by Daddy's office. But boy, when I saw Mr. Baruch in there, I didn't go in there. He and Mr. Eddie shared an office, my dad and Mr. Kaminsky. Had an office back there, and that would be where Mr. Baruch would conduct his business. Yeah, this is home, and there's some interesting places right around here. I'll have to inject a little bit about. Yeah, Jim did a beautiful job on this place. My sister passed away about three years ago, and before that, for about 3 years, 5 years, she lived over at Merle's Inlet. And she was here by herself. My mother had passed away, and Peggy was here by herself, and it was just too much house to keep up, and it needed some work. So we sold it at that time. And it, like 716, was another one of these 100 by 220s. So we had garden and chickens and all the rest back in the backyard. Interesting things here. Of course, you know that we know Indigo Society down here. And they used to have some good dances over at that place, you know. And I remember, as I was telling Henrietta, my sister and I in the summertime would sleep out on the upstairs porch out there. And all the sounds, I tell them about the sound, you could hear down the lumber mill, big lumber mill was down the way down there. And I could hear them rolling that lumber on the ship at night. They had these tracks that they'd roll it on. I've gone to sleep a minute and I was like music, listening to that thing. In fact, I think one of the best articles I ever wrote for an English paper was telling about that same thing. Another thing I think about at that time, back in those days, was hucksters coming down the street. And you'd hear them in the morning. And one thing they'd be yelling was, "White grape! White grape!" You understand that? Selling white grapes, okay. Tomatoes! And they'd come along the streets. Well, later on, when I had my little red wagon, I used to be down there selling tomatoes. My daddy had a big garden, and he grew the prettiest tomatoes. And I'd sell them down the street here about 5 or 10 cents a pound. There was Miss Yaden that had a boarding house, and when I got to the end of my line, she would take whatever was left. The old house across, let's start right here. This house, and I think that's one of the prettiest houses. That's an old Charleston single house, you know, what they call a single house, because they were taxed on the frontage. It had fallen into complete. It looked like it was just about to fall down. There was an old lady, Miss Laura Congdon. Bless her heart, she was the backbone of that Methodist church down there. Yeah. And you talk about the widow's mite. She ran a little gift shop in there, a little gift shop, and she would sell little knickknacks that she would make and whatnot. And you know where the money went? Duncan Methodist Church. Hardly enough. I went in there one time. She lived back in the back of it. And I went in there in the middle of winter, and I thought I would freeze to death before I got out of that place. I don't know whether she had any heat at all, or maybe a little trash burner or something back in there. But that was Miss Laura. And then the Farley sisters, Miss Elizabeth and Miss her sister, bought that thing and did this job on it. And I tell you, it was a blessing. It's a blessing. That was a open lot for a long time, and then Mr. C.V. Steinhardt bought that thing. He had a little bookstore on Front Street. Mr. C.V. Steinhardt. He married one of the Fords. When I tell you, one of the first families of Georgetown were the Fords. They were plantation Fords that came down from around South Island and down that way. And he married one of the Ford girls down there. And Mr. Steinhardt, bless him, he had a nose about like this. And he used to go during the war, we had what we call the Coast Guard Auxiliary. We would go down and sit in North Inlet at night. They had mounted patrol that worked the beaches, but we had to sit down there to be sure that no German submarines came in to attack Georgetown. Okay? We were well prepared for them if they came in. And Mr. Steinhardt, like I say, he had a proboscis of some sort on him, about like Jimmy Durante. And there was an old turtle that used to come up down there. And the turtles have a... And we were fishing along there, a little turtle came up. One of the fellows on board said, "Steinhardt overboard." So that was his last trip to North. Getting back again to and how times have changed. One of the most well-educated men in black men in Georgetown at that time was Dr. Beck, Dr. Beck's father. He was a principal of the school here, and Dr. Beck, my father was secretary and treasurer of the school board at that time. And I remember a lot of times Professor Beck would come around here to see Daddy on some business. And Professor Beck would never walk up on the front porch. It was a wooden front porch at that time. He'd come up on that front porch and knock on that front, and I think now had the meaning. Down on the corner, just down from where we were, I think it's a Clemson, they use a Clemson extension place on the corner. The Plowdens lived there. And Mr. Plowden, Mr. Ruthven V. Plowden, also worked for the grocery company with Daddy, and his wife and my mother, Miss Edna Plowden, and my mother were closest friends. In fact, my mother was godmother for their oldest daughter. But Miss Plowden, the Plowdens were living over there, and Mr. Morgan, you know, after W.D. Morgan House across the street. Mr. Morgan, the first mayor of Georgetown, and a remarkable man, I can remember. And after he passed away, he was a staunch Catholic, and he gave that house to the Catholic Church, and they used it for a while for a nunnery. And they had these nuns in their white habits. They had the white habit thing. And Miss Plowden had gone uptown somewhere, and a cook, Edna, was still at the house. And when Miss Plowden came back, she looked, and Edna wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't anywhere around. Miss Plowden called for her. Edna, where are you? Are you here? She had this voice. I hear Miss Plowden, I'm coming. And she came, and she'd been in this closet back there. She said, what you doing in there? I said, well, I've been here, and the door, somebody knocked on the door, and I go, and there was a lady Ku Klux in. Up to wartime. I was here from 24 until 42. Okay, I enlisted in December of 42, and then went on active duty in June of 43. And when I came back, I lived on and off here. I was working for the International Paper Company in the woods, estimating timber. And when I was here, I would stay here at home. My father was William Henry Thomas Sr., okay? And they bought the house. There was a doctor that owned this house. And Daddy bought it, I was born in 24, he bought it in either 22 or 23. I think it was 23. I believe he bought it a year before I was born, 20 years. Yeah. So he bought it, and there was a doctor, as I say, who lived here, and that's another place that was kind of haunted to me, but not that much because it was a kind of open room. But upstairs, they said that was where he did his operations, in this little room, just a small room upstairs. And I shied away from that room a little bit. I think Daddy got an 8th grade education, and then he went to Draughton Business College in Atlanta. He got a business degree down there, and came back and went to work for them in the early 20s, and he worked till he died. And he died while I was in South Pacific. He died in 45. Died in 45. My mother's name was Emma Beatty Thomas. My daddy was from Williamsburg County. He came from out a big place over there, Neesmith. Between Neesmith and Rams, if you know where I'm talking. Somewhere close to James, up to what's that other little community out there? But anyway, Jamestown and Rams, and not Jamestown, that's down the way, but Rams and Neesmith. And Mom came from Conway Borough. Not Conway, but Conway Borough. Daddy took me down to the Georgetown Times office and said, let's put an ad in there, the camphor trees for sale. So I went around selling these little camphor. That was one of my first money-making efforts. All right, selling these camphor trees. And but there's one left here
Did you put them in pots?
This yard was full of them. My son David was working for Brook Green at that time, and anytime they had plants that they were doing away with, you know, and a lot of strange exotic plants, he'd come home and he and Peggy would plant these things around. What's left of it, I don't know. There's one of my trees, that magnolia right there. I picked that up on the side of the road down about Annandale Plantation. I was down there working, making the delivery one time, and I got out and I saw that little plant. I picked that home and found it. That's the tree, what, 40 years? Let's see. That's in the 55, 60. Yeah, that tree is about 55 years old, maybe 60 years. That's when I got into the newspaper business, when I went down there to advertise for those camphor trees. I was hooked. I knew, and that's what I wanted to study. I wanted to go to either journalism or architecture. And they had neither one at the Citadel. My daddy said, well, that's where the checks go into. That house, that's exactly like it was. Right where that window is there was about where the butler's pantry was. And then behind that was the kitchen. And then off behind that was the garage. Later on the garage. First of all, the garage was right over here. I remember it was there when my daddy was up there one time cranking the car, and that thing backfired on him and broke his arm. Yeah. But the garage was right there, and right off from it was a big pot where they used to do...
Boiled peanuts.
No. Clothes.
Oh, what? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Put
that bluing in it. Hey,
yeah,
you ever heard of bluing?
Oh, yes.
Y'all know bluing,
Used it,
huh?
Yeah.
All right. You put that bluing in there, and I remember I would do it and hang it up. We had solar-powered dryers.
Dryers, yes.
And behind that was a great big shed, and some wood went in that. And right behind it was Daddy had a little workshop.